Let's sit nice and tall and close the eyes. I'm just taking this moment to arrive. And feel that whatever part of you is touching the floor is grounded. And feel that the rest of you is rising up from those roots in a manner that empowers your soul to shine, your heart to be open and receptive, the breath to be deep, and for consciousness to flow through you, within you, around you, and throughout. And draw the hands together in front of the heart. We'll lift our voices in one beautiful Om. And then I'll share the invocatory mantras with you. Take a breath in. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha Hari Om Ganana Antva Ganapati Gum Havamahe Kavin Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jesvarajam Brahmanan Brahmanaspata Anav Shrinvanuti Besidha Sadhanam Mahaganapataye Namaha Prano Devi Saraswati Vajebhir Vajini Vati Dhinama Vitriyavatu Ano Devo Brahataf Parvata Da Saraswati Ajata Gantu Yagnyam Havan Devi Jujushana Gritachi Shagman Novacha Mushati Shrinotu Vagdevyai Namaha. Releasing the hands down, fluttering the eyes open. It's so nice to see you all here today. I'd like to say congratulations to the retreat attendees. You survived a weekend of silence. It's no small matter, right? It's really not. Even if you are a seasoned practitioner of Vipassana, every time you choose silence, it has a different set of obstacles and challenges that you will have to face. A different set of issues that come to the surface, a different set of impressions from past traumas, injuries, from life that will come up for you. And so no matter whether you're taking a vow of silence for 15 minutes or for 10 days, there's going to be challenges there. There is. And the reason for that is because we're so busy being distracted. We're so busy thinking, I've got to get this done, got to get this done, got to get this done, got to go here, then got to go there, then got to go there. We're already planning 5 years into the future and we're not even there yet. How many of you are planning next year's vacation already? Right? Yeah, totally. So we're rarely in this moment. We're always in a thought about what comes next. But stillness and silence is in the moment. It's the stuff that the moment is made of. This moment is made of stillness and silence. So of course we're not completely familiar with it. We're hardly familiar with it at all. But if we want to become familiar with it, then what we need to do is draw some of that energy back that we're putting into the distractions. Close the eyes, deepen the breath, and be present. And then what we'll find is something really interesting. It's like, I'm sure you've all had the situation in your life where you had a friend and you thought it was a friend and you were with that friend all the time, right? And they told you what you wanted to hear and they were what you thought was your best bud. But the moment that things went awry, then you realize that they were a fair weather friend. And the one individual who you commonly and constantly overlooked, you came to realize was a far more profound friend to you than the other. Have you all had that happen? Well, distraction is your fair weather friend. Stillness and silence is your eternal BFF, for sure. Stillness and silence will never let you down. Stillness and silence will never desert you. Stillness and silence will never turn its back on you. Stillness and silence will never lie to you. It will never try to dissuade you or artificially inflate you. Stillness and silence is the truth. So that is the best friend that you wish to have, because stillness and silence is also divinity itself. It is divinity itself with no attributes, only pureness, only absoluteness. Oh, that sounds pretty nice. But really, it's pretty scary to humans, because we have a mind and we have an ego and we have an imagination, and we're constantly putting those three beautiful gifts to what we could call an incorrect purpose. We say, my mind. I'm going to keep my mind busy because it's always busy anyway. And that's the number one reason why most people will not take a vow of silence even for 10 minutes. Because they say, I'm going to keep my mind busy because my mind is always busy anyway. And so I can't sit in meditation. I can't sit in silence. It's not possible. But the reality is the mind is only busy because the ego is telling it to be busy. The mind is only distracted because the ego is causing it to be distracted. It's not the natural state of the mind to be chaotic. The mind is a thinker, yes, absolutely. But the ego tells it what to think. The mind is just collecting data. It's like, oh, more data, more data, more data. And the ego says, well, that data goes in the file of, oh, I like that. And that data goes in the file of, no, thank you. And that data goes in the file of, never again. So the ego is imposing its preferences on the mind, which is causing the mind to work 2, 3, 4, 5 times as hard as it typically would in order to try to satisfy the ego. So the mind and the ego, we misuse them so drastically. And then the third, the imagination that we have. Boy, we get ourselves in trouble there. In Hinduism, there's something called the Great Imagination. And what the Great Imagination is, in part, is our amazingly beautiful ability to take that which has no form, God, goddess, divinity, consciousness, has no form, and to see it as a form. Shiva, Durga, Christ, Buddha, the crucifix, whatever your choice is, you have this great imagination that you can impose form and name upon that which is formless and nameless. And you can be inspired by that. You can carry that along with you throughout your life and be completely inspired. But we got a little lost somewhere along the way, and we started using our imagination for other things, like how can I get rich? How can I get popular? How can I get that? How can I not get that? How can I get what I want and avoid what I don't? So we've misused the mind, we misuse the ego, and we misuse the imagination. 3 divine gifts that we have been given. The ego is a divine gift. Everything is a divine gift if you really want to get to that esoteric level of things. Everything is a divine gift. And the ego is a divine gift when it's healthy, because the ego is actually what drives you to be a seeker, to have questions, to find answers, to pray, to practice, to meditate, to take a vow of silence for 10 minutes. The healthy ego is what drives you to do that also. It's what drives you, in part, to want to serve individuals and beings who need to be served, who need to have some support somewhere along the way. The healthy ego is a factor in that. Absolutely. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, where is my ego right now? Is my ego healthy or unhealthy? And it's always like this balancing act. But nowadays, it seems more and more we're getting lost in the unhealthy side because of fear and because of perceived separation and because of corruption and because of chaos in the world. I mean, there's actually people in the world who are manipulating chaos for the sake of keeping us scared. And we have to not be scared. We have to choose and say, I'm going to choose the divinity of stillness and silence so that I can be strong in my body and my mind, so my ego can be healthy, so that I can serve more profoundly in this world where service is so needed right now. So we need to find a way to reorient the mind and the ego and our imagination toward health and wholeness again. So Vipassana is a beautiful practice. Vipassana is typically 10 days of silence. We start off here with a weekend. It's like put your toe in the water and test it out, and then maybe come back for next year's 10 days. But Vipassana means to gain an insight, to gain little insights. So when you're silent for even 10 minutes, inevitably you're going to gain an insight. And that insight will either be a reflection of an unhealthy mind, ego, and imagination, or a healthy one. Depends on the condition of it in the moment. If I stop talking right now, and we were just quiet for 10 minutes, and you weren't expecting that, bless you.
Excuse me.
And you weren't expecting that, your mind and your ego and your imagination would start talking to you. Oh, this is weird. How uncomfortable for her to stop talking right in the middle of a session. Oh, man. Right? You would have a reaction. That's an insight. The insight is maybe there's a tendency to have reactions. Or if in that moment you had an inkling of what was coming, perhaps, and your mind and your ego and your imagination were in a little bit of a more healthier place, you might say, let me take a moment to reflect on the things we were just talking about. Or let me just take a moment to breathe, collect myself. What a gift this moment is, whether someone's talking or not. What a gift this moment is. But it's not easy to recognize that gift. It's just not. Because of how just chaotic life typically is, hour to hour and day to day, week to week, year to year. But Vipassana, if we give ourselves that time, we will inevitably have deeper and deeper and more profound insights. In 10 minutes, you may have a little insight. In 10 days, you'll have a lot of insights. The 10th time that you do a 10-day Vipassana, boy, the insights you will have will seem just like the first time you did a 10-day Vipassana. Yeah, because we were like onions, right? We were talking, I don't remember who was that I said, don't forget you're an onion. Yeah, don't forget you're an onion. You're not just one layer. It's not like healing's done. Nope. You're an onion with thousands of layers, hundreds of thousands of layers. And every time that you come into silence, whether it's for 10 minutes or 10 days, or 10 years if you are, a master yogi, right? Swami Nirmalananda, silence for 8 years. His devotees were so frustrated over his vow. They were like, you can't do that to us. We need you to talk to us. And he was like, once a month, I will come out and speak for like 10 minutes. Be there. Or done. Once a month for like 8 years, he came out for like 10 minutes, Yeah. So no matter how many times, no matter how long your silence is, you still have challenges that you'll have to face because you are like an onion. And the impressions and the experiences of this life are not just superficial. They're in the cellular structure of your body and being. And so every particular circumstance that comes up is another way of dealing with it. Another way. So don't think that just because you did one silent meditation, or one silent retreat rather, that you're done now, you're good. I got it. Did that, check. No. Nope. Do 10,000 more of them over the next 10,000 lives. 10,000 for every life. And then there'll still be work to do. So the one thing we need to do is get this thought out of our head that there's like an end to this, right? Because we are a work in progress. We're constantly progressing. We're never reaching that end goal that we have imagined for ourselves. Maybe I shouldn't say never, because inevitably we will reach some kind of a unity. We will reach some kind of an awakening, some kind of an enlightenment, some kind of a return home to source. We absolutely will encounter that. Oh, that's a whole other topic. But as long as there is one single being suffering on this planet, we will inevitably come back into a human form as the great bodhisattvas who put off their enlightenment in order to come back and serve the world until the world is free of suffering. It's our responsibility as spiritual beings to see to that. So we have a lot of work that we will constantly come back for. Constantly come back. And then every time, the slippery slope is like every time that we come back into a human form, because reincarnation is a very huge, real thing in yoga, Advaita Vedanta, Hinduism, and all the related philosophies and wisdoms. Every time we come back into a human form, we come back with the best of intentions, but we are susceptible then to taking steps backward again. We're susceptible to the slippery slope. So we have to be mindful, and this is where your spiritual sadhana comes in handy. It's so important because the more that you practice your sadhana, your spiritual practice, the less slippery that slope might be. So practice silence every day for 10 minutes, and then increase that by 1 minute every day until you get to 3 times your age. That works. Yeah. So that means that you would be silent for a lot of the day. Find out how peaceful life is then. So have some aspect of silence be part of your daily practice. And the more silent you become, the less slippery that slope of falling down, of taking steps backward, of forgetting the truth of yourself. And then do additional spiritual practices too. Your yoga asana, your meditation, your japa, service, whatever it happens to be. But incorporate silence into that so that you have insights, more and more insights. Not insights that come from interacting with the outside world, because you can never be too sure of the clarity of those insights. Insights that come from here, from the stillness and the silence within yourself, that's absolute clarity when you listen to it. And everybody here knows exactly what I'm talking about, because you've all had an insight in yourself where you said, I know the truth, I know the answer, I just don't want to. And so you procrastinate. I never forget the first time my mother told me I was a procrastinator. My feelings were so hurt. I was like, I am not a procrastinator. I was like 12 or something. I was like, what does that mean? She said, go look it up. So I did, because that's what I did. And I was like, puts things off. Ew. Don't be a procrastinator. Listen to yourself. Procrastinating, listening consciously, only increases suffering. It only puts you further into that fire of suffering. We don't want the fire of suffering. We want the fire of healing. And in order for the fire of healing to be profound in our life experience, we have to be listening consciously to the truth of the stillness and silence within. That's where the true insights are. That's where they exist. Not with what your current BFF tells you. Not with what your mom or dad tell you. They have some good wisdom, But they don't know all. And I think that was one of the most humbling things about being a parent with my children, was the moment where I realized, like, all of the mistakes that I had made in my youth, all of the things that I learned in my life, they had some kind of use to them, but not anywhere near as much as I wanted it to, which is why they had to learn on their own. And instead of imposing the lessons that I learned in my life on my children, I had to back up and become quiet and silent and watch and witness as they grew through their own experiences into the people that they're meant to be, outside of my manipulative mind, my ego, and my imagination. Yeah, does that make sense? Now apply that to everybody in your circle, not just your children. Apply that to your friends and your coworkers and your boss and your employees and your partner. Apply that to your dog, to your cat. Apply it to everything and everybody. Step back and be silent and witness their path, pure as it is for them, without your imposing your mental state, your ego state, or your imagination. It changes things. It'll change every relationship that you have for the better. Because once we stop trying to manipulate something, we have a greater clarity about it and a greater ability to be compassionate toward it, have empathy, and even be inspired. Because we don't point out other people's mistakes and faults because we don't have any, because we don't make any. We point out other people's mistakes and faults because we're trying to hide our own, right? When we stop trying to hide, when we stop being overly invested in fixing others, we become more invested in doing the work at hand that we have to do ourselves. And so this practice of Vipassana, it provides insight, lots of very valuable insight. And it also provides the strength and the resiliency necessary to do that work that we discover in the process of our spiritual path. It provides us with the strength, with the resiliency, with the courage, with the bravery, with the creativity, with the compassion, with the empathy, to do the work and to stay focused to some degree on the work. And to move away from useless judgment. Like, there's two kinds of judgment. There's useless judgment and there's useful judgment. 99% of our judgments are useless. So toss them. Only like 1% of our judgments are useful. And the 1% of judgments that are useful are not the ones that are condemning, pointing fingers, supporting the storyline about worthlessness. Those judgments are not useful. So put those off to the side somewhere. Let them fall away. What kind of judgments are useful? The kind that recognize growth and change. The kind that acknowledge that this life is difficult. The kind that says, I may fall down, but I will always be able to get back up again. The kind of judgments that are inspiring and uplifting and unifying. Those are the judgments. The ones that are clear. They don't make excuses. They don't say, oh, it's okay. It's only the 1500th time you've done that. You can do it another 1500 times. Nope. It's the one, it's the aspect of the self that says, enough. No more excuses. Sit down silent for 10 minutes a day. Period. I don't want to hear the phone ring. I don't want to hear your favorite show is on. I don't want to hear that the kids are distracting and the dog barked. I don't want to hear about your neighbor's loud muffler. I don't want to hear about how the mind goes and goes and goes and goes. Of course it does. That's the way you trained it. Everybody's mind goes and goes and goes and goes. That's an excuse to not sit. Move away from the excuses and into the clarity. The more you sit, the more you'll retrain the mind. It won't happen immediately. Oh, there'll be a battle. Boy, will there be a battle. You might walk around for a couple of days looking really upset. Like as you're doing the inner war. But eventually the mind will start to go in the direction that you lead it because it has to. It doesn't really have a choice. I think one of the most valuable things that back in the day, I had this amazing therapist. Many of you know that I have a background of trauma. And so I was in therapy for many years working with that trauma, learning how to deal with it. And she would always have these amazing insights to share with me. And I think that one of the main things that she said that I still remember to this day and use on a regular basis is this. If you change the conversation will change. But if you continue the conversation the way you've been having it, then nothing will change. And to change the conversation, all you have to do is change one thing. What you say and how you say it. So instead of, this mind of mine, it's not going to let me sit. Instead of saying that, say to yourself, I'm training my mind. I'm training myself. And it's hard, but I'm doing it. As long as it takes. How many of you here have had a new puppy or kitten that you brought home with you? Yeah. Did they poop or pee on the floor? Of course they did. How did you get them to stop that? You trained them. And did they learn overnight? No. Sometimes it took a good year, right? Sometimes it takes a long time, but eventually they learned. Poop outside, not inside. Well, that's like your mind, right? Right now, your mind is pooping in the house. You're all shaking your head going, yeah. You're all shaking your head, yep. Exactly. Your minds are all pooping in the house. Now you got to teach them how to go outside. Yeah. So training the mind, right? Train the mind. And be aware that that's what you're doing. And that it doesn't really matter if you've been practicing for a year or 5 years or 25 years or 50 years, you still have work to do. And it bless you. And it's okay if you take 2 steps back and 5 steps forward and then 7 steps back. That's what it is. That's what it's going to be. You don't need perfection. Perfection is not going to come readily. We're humans, therefore we are inherently challenged by this life. And those challenges are going to continually be a cause of derailment where it comes to our spiritual seeking. Tongue twister there for some reason. Spiritual seeking. But the more we train the mind and the more we train ourselves through committing ourselves to our sadhana, then the less we'll be derailed. And when we are derailed, we will meet that with a greater compassion, with a greater empathy, and we'll have more faith in our own ability to stand back up again and to just dive right back into the practices. We won't be so condemning of ourselves. So this conversation today, a little bit about the Vipassana, but so much more about the silence and the stillness of it. Because therein lies the key, right? Sit outside in nature. Walk through the forest without speaking. Sit on your yoga mat. Go through your entire yoga asana practice without saying a word to yourself or to anybody else. Turn the music off. Oh, I don't know. Can I practice yoga asana without music on? I mean, what about Krishna Das? Doesn't everybody want to listen to him? No, just get on your yoga mat and practice in silence. Get rid of the distractions, at least some of the time. How can we be balanced if all we ever do is lean to one side? Right? So if I went through life turned like this, how could I ever be balanced? I would never know what the middle was, and I would never know what the other direction was. So in order to acquire a greater balance, we need to kind of back away from that edge. The edge of always needing distraction. The TV's got to be on, the music's got to be on, someone's got to be talking. Come a little bit more to the midline, turn it off a little bit of the time, and then maybe even go in the other direction and turn it off a lot of the time and see where that brings you. What have you been missing out on? What have you been missing out on by keeping the TV on? By keeping the radio and the music on, by keeping yourself distractedly engaged. You'll never know unless you turn it off. So we're about midway through, so at this point I'll say, any questions or reflections? Any questions or reflections? Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. So back to where you were talking about, come back constantly until there's no more suffering. Can you give me a little bit more clarity on what constitutes suffering? Because I see people who make themselves suffer unnecessarily, or we react. Initially that reaction is suffering, or maybe it's grief. Like what falls under that umbrella, and what's the general condition of suffering that we're trying to get rid of? All of it, I guess.
Where to begin? Okay. Absent a unique understanding that everything and every situation is divinity approaching you and asking for a relationship. Absent that unique understanding, any disturbance is suffering. Right? Does that make sense? Absent that unique understanding. So if you do not realize, And I don't mean logically, I mean truly. If you do not realize that the wind blowing, the rain raining, the sun shining, the person yelling, the person complimenting, the toe being stubbed, on the table in a dark room, the knee being broken by two puppies playing. That this is all God asking you for relationship. Not all relationships are easy schmeezy. Some relationships are pretty freaking hard, but they're all divinity. They're all divinity offering you an opportunity for relationship. And relationship doesn't mean giving in. Relationship means being clear. So any disturbance outside of that understanding is suffering. There's two types of suffering. There's necessary suffering and there's unnecessary suffering. Now, we're spirits or souls embodied in a human body. Necessary suffering is what happens to this physical body. Necessary suffering is the process of being born, the process of all the physiological changes, mental changes that happen that are outside of my control, and death. The release of this physical body. That's all necessary suffering. Unnecessary suffering, the arguments, the self-judgment, the judgment of others, the frustrations, the waves that we ourselves are making, in large part because we don't spend enough time silent. So we have two sufferings. We have unnecessary suffering and necessary suffering. And we are so engaged in unnecessary suffering. Unnecessary suffering includes the idea, the thought, the story that I'm going to die one day. And maybe I don't want to. That's unnecessary suffering. Of course I'm going to die one day. We all are. So why am I spending energy fearing that, worrying about that? It's very human, but why am I doing it? We are so wrapped up in the unnecessary suffering that it takes all of our energy. It takes our reserve and leaves us with little to nothing else for the necessary suffering. So we don't have a tendency to deal with the necessary suffering in a healthy way. We see it as inconvenient, an aggravation, a why me. We don't deal with it in a way that's healthy or in a way that is peaceful because we just don't have the energy to, because we have been taking all of our energy and feeding it into the fire of the unnecessary. If we stop feeding all of our energy to what is unnecessary, now you're not going to stop doing that 100%, but if you were able to change 1% of the way you expend your energy on what is unnecessary, you would be blown out of the water by how much clarity, how much patience, how much compassion, how much change would happen in you in a relatively quick period of time because of that extra energy. People say, well, why do monks spend so much time alone? Are they antisocial? And it's like, no, because they're taking all of the energy and they're putting it someplace else. Taking it and putting it into their spiritual practice, into their service. They've made a choice in that regard. Well, I have a friend who's not a monk, and they don't tend to go out too often. They don't like to go to the bar. They don't like to hang out at parties. Good for them. Go be with them. Forget the party. Forget the thing that drains you. Go spend time with what doesn't drain you. Maybe you could learn a thing or two from your silent friend. Oh, I could never, my mind works too quick. There goes that ego imagination again, right? Trying to thwart you, trying to sabotage you from your birthright. And that's the other thing too, like it's your birthright to know stillness and silence and goodness. It's your birthright to know who you genuinely are. It's your birthright. The ego says that's not too interesting. There's not much of a story for me to tell there. So it sabotages you every time, that you try something new, or it tries to sabotage you. So the unnecessary and the necessary, if we cut down even 1% of what is unnecessary and suffering, then what we'll find is that our entire life will change dramatically. We will have so much more clarity and energy available to us. And then what will we do with it? Will we go to some other extreme, or will we just conserve? And this is why brahmacharya is such an important yama, such an important virtue in yoga and Advaita Vedanta, and all of the related traditions. Brahmacharya is to be the student of Brahma, or to be like Brahma, to conserve your energy. Oftentimes it's translated as sexual abstinence, but it's not just sexual abstinence. If it's appropriate, it's sexual abstinence. If you're a householder, married, and looking to have a family, then that's probably not the way to do it, right? So it's got to be an appropriate application to you. So what would be an appropriate application of brahmacharya for a householder is don't put fuel in the fire of distraction, the fire of the unnecessary. Don't put your fuel in that fire. Keep your energy for the things that are necessary. When we are so overwhelmed by the unnecessary, it's really hard to tell the difference between the two. It's so difficult. And suffering happens what we cause ourselves, accidents, and then the things that are going to be, like birth and death and some amount of life in between there, So breaking my knee was an accident. For those who don't know, in March, I think it was in mid-March, my daughter's dog and my dog, we were at the dog park, and they're both about 65 pounds, and they were running, and my daughter's dog ran into the side of my knee and threw me and crushed the top of my tibia. So I was in a wheelchair for 4 months and had to have some reconstructive surgery done there. It was a pretty intense time. But it was also a beautiful time. It had its moments of frustration, absolutely, and most definitely there was a lot of pain. But it also had its beauty. And the beauty was, I got to stop. I guess the pandemic wasn't enough, I needed a little extra stop. So the universe said, here, have a knee, a broken one at that. And and so just stopping and really humbling, being humbled by that, by not being able to do and to live in the way that I had brought myself to be accustomed to. I always took for granted how flexible my body is. And now I can't sit on my heels yet, right? Maybe at some point in time I will, but who knows? So something so simple. And I could sit there and be like, well, I can't sit on my heels anymore. I could judge myself for that. Because we would as humans, wouldn't we? We would say, well, I'm somehow different now. But the reality is, no, I am not different. My knee is different. But I am not my knee. My knee is part of my body. And what happens to my body happens to my body. It's necessary suffering. If you're going to live this life, you're going to have injuries. Accidents are going to happen. So you just find a way to live with that, to be okay with that. When I was much younger, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. Not grand mal seizures, but petit mal seizures. So like fluorescent lights would really bother me. And initially, I had a reaction to that. I was like, no, you're not taking my driver's license. No. I mean, this is like 30 years ago now, maybe even longer than that. And I was very rambunctious over this diagnosis, and I was very resistant to it. It's like, no, I'm not going to be on medication. No, no, no. And I got myself all worked up over it. And then I was like, I need meditation. Go meditate. And I'm sitting there, and I'm meditating. And am I meditating? No, I'm mulling over stuff in my mind. But as I'm mulling over stuff in my mind, this, and calling it meditation, this loud voice comes forward in my mind and says, don't be silly. It's just another way to experience life. And I went, be quiet. Just be quiet. But I couldn't get rid of that one-liner. It's just another way to experience life. And from that moment forward, I had no problem with it. Give me the medication. I'll take it for 6 months. If it doesn't work, then we'll work something else out. You have to take my license, but please only take it for the 6 months. Let's do this in steps that I can deal with. And everything turned out fine. I don't have to be on medication anymore. I have my driver's license. Yeah. I stay away from fluorescent lights and high stress situations. It's just another way to experience life. That's all it is. And you are going to experience life. You don't have a choice in that because you're here. So best to have a clear perspective of that and to put into place all the tools necessary to help you accept suffering as an inevitable part of this life, to understand the difference between unnecessary suffering and necessary suffering, and to work very hard, very diligently, and very sincerely to acquire the tools that allow you to breathe through the suffering. Not breeze through the suffering, breathe through the suffering. No one's going to breeze through suffering. That's called bypassing. Yeah. But we do want to breathe through it so that we can see clearly what needs to be done, bless you, and clearly what does not need to be done. So we can make choices that are more aligned with our truest intention. So we can put the excuses off to the side, stop being so caught up in the story, and instead be what we genuinely are, seekers of truth. The truth. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fall backward. You're going to fall down. And you're going to stand back up again. Because that's what we do. And we do it well. We do. Great question.
Thank you for such a good answer.
You're very welcome. Any other questions or reflections at this point?
I'd like to share something.
Certainly.
So I've been tested a lot, I'd say the last 14 days of my awareness. Because I'm sure it's been moving through much longer than that. And I wasn't part of the silent retreat, but I find it interesting being here as it comes to its closure in a sense. But I've been presented with a lot of situations where I felt I needed to respond and I needed to react. And what I'm taking away from this day is not sitting with the situation and how I will respond, sitting with, does this feed the holy within me or does it not feed the holy within me? Do I choose to pick this up or do I choose to put this down? And it came to a very screeching climax, I guess, yesterday when it ripped through my nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, we are going, this is 14 days now. Bam, 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 lesson after lesson. What am I not getting here? And what I needed to do was come here and listen to this talk, right? But I'm like, oh, this just got me. This just ripped through my nervous system. So you would think that that would be a negative thing, right? That I had allowed everything to affect me to that capacity. But what my body was saying, you can't take this on anymore. And I had no option but to say yesterday, I need time and I need space and I need to put this down. So thank you. My takeaway from this is asking myself not how I should react, but do I pick this up or do I put this down? Is it feeding me or is it creating disharmony? So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're very welcome. It's interesting to know that so many of our reactions are actually based in justification. We feel threatened. We feel, and even if there's not like somebody looking at you expecting something from you, we imagine. So again, it's a misappropriation of our imagination. We imagine, well, if, get rid of the ifs. Get rid of the ifs. Ifs aren't happening. They're just not, you know? You don't need to justify yourself to anyone. You don't need to spend inordinate amounts of time with ifs. You don't need to pick things up that don't belong to you. Pick things up that don't belong to you. So that means you have to spend a little bit of time inquiring, well, what belongs to me? Nowhere near as much as you think. We're a bunch of collectors of tchotchkes. We are. We collect so much and we put it up on the shelf that's like on our shoulders, you know? And we don't need to do that. Just leave it there. The person that it belongs to will find it eventually. Odds are it's probably not you. And even if you are somehow involved, the part that we often pick up is not the part that belongs to us. So let's say that you have a disagreement with somebody. And the disagreement has an impact on your relationship with that person. You both had some really good points to make. They talked about how in some aspect maybe you were unreliable to their expectations, and you talked about how in some aspects they don't understand the craziness of your life and that you weren't able to be accessible. That tends to be kind of a common thing for people, right? So you both made some points. You both expressed what you had expected from each other. And now you think that means that you have to apologize and take complete responsibility for the situation. No. You only need to take responsibility for a couple of things. Number one, how you feel. Number two, any harm you have committed intentionally. And number three, how you intend to move forward. You don't need to take ownership over the other person's expectations of you. That's not appropriate. That's their work to understand why they have expectations of you. You don't need to justify. You don't need to pick up even more burden in this life. And yet we do so much. It's a misuse of our energy. It creates more unnecessary suffering. And then you know what the nervous system says to us? The nervous system says, excuse me, Swamini. This is the nervous system talking to you. I have just enough reserve for this situation, but if you don't self-correct, I can't promise the next one. And you don't listen. Oh, everything is fine. Hands are shaking, you know. Eyes are blurry. Everything is fine. Next situation comes along, and suddenly you can't breathe. You have anxiety, and you're like, my body is failing me. No, it's not. You didn't listen. Your nervous system said, excuse me. And your answer was denial. Anne Marie, yeah.
Yeah, speaking of that, I was wondering, so like coming to a Vipassana retreat, does that help to build up your ojas so that you have more, I guess you could say, energy to work on matters?
So ojas is a very complicated subject. And in the Ayurveda world in the West, there's a lot of talk about drinking certain drinks to build up your ojas and certain practices to build up your ojas. And there's some validity there. However, if you drink a certain drink to build up your ojas and then run off to some self-destructive behavior, you're not building up your ojas. You're insulting yourself. And you're much smarter than that, so stop.
What is ojas?
So ojas is the energy of life that is within you. Yeah. Ojas is, you have ojas and you have tejas in your body. Ojas is your immune function. Okay. It's your vitality, and then the tejas is your radiance. Okay. Yeah. So basically, when we're talking about your ojas being depleted, what we're actually saying is that your immune function is depleted and everything that goes along with that. So yes, you can absolutely take steps in life to try to support the ojas, to try to support the function of your immune system and all of the associated tissues and fluids within the body that support that. But the thing is that it goes beyond one thing. So yes, silent retreats, particularly many of them, will continually bolster a more vibrant ojas in the body. But in your life outside the retreat, things have to change also. Otherwise, you're just ping-ponging back and forth between, I'm trying to be well, actually I'm unwell. I'm trying to be well, actually I'm feeding unwellness. Back and forth. So you need to look at life itself and say, these are things that need to change so that the benefit of the silent meditation, the benefit of the Vipassana is going to linger and begin to build a foundation for me. Do it knowingly. It'll potentially happen over time anyway, as you'll be like, I don't understand why I don't want to go out with my friends tonight. We always go out dancing at the club. And you'll be like, but I really want a quiet night at home. It'll bleed over into other parts of your life eventually. But do we really want to wait for eventually? Or do we want to take kind of our life experience purposefully and make changes and then let the Vipassana be a support to the changes that we're making? Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. Did you have a question? No. Did anybody else? Other questions? Reflections? Yeah.
I'll share.
Yeah. Who said that?
Hi.
Yes. Hi.
So the part that you said about the BFF and the fair weather friend, it really resonated with me. Because what I noticed in my meditations this weekend is the mind has been trained to worry about everybody else, to think about everybody else, my students, my friends, my family. And that has been my modus operandi my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And, yoga has helped me in the last 20 years really shine a light on taking care of myself, but without the stillness and without the silence and without the sitting, I still go back to that. It's like it's definitely training like a whole pack of dogs. I also have a pack of dogs. But when you spoke about the fair weather friend and the silent one that's always been sitting there, it's like, I always tell my students, be your best friend. But I need to be my own best friend. And the silence really shines a huge light on like where all my energy really is going. And so I'm just really grateful for the silence this weekend.
Thank you. And I'm really grateful for the epiphany that you've had about self-care and what's needed. Yeah. And I would venture to say you're not alone in that struggle. And I do think that nowadays too we're seeing that more men are also sharing kind of in that struggle, but that's definitely a female type of a struggle to be had is the constant putting everybody else first. I mean, they've done psych studies on this, you know, on how a woman cannot relax in the same way that a man can relax. And again, this is based on scientific research that they did, where a man can just kind of sit down. It's time for the football game. The whole world has stopped. Okay, that's it. There's nothing. I mean, I don't care if the roof is leaking. I don't care where the kids are. It doesn't matter to me. The dog's pooping on the floor. It's fine. You know, this is what we're doing now. And that a man has this really amazing capacity to do that, where a woman will not be able to experience pleasure in that way. She will not be able to stop. She will always wonder where the children are. She will always wonder what has been left undone. She will always wonder if her partner is happy enough. She will always wonder. She will always, because there's a natural caregiver within the woman that compels her to that. And then there's also sociocultural training that has put us into that place, that has told us that we are responsible for everybody else's happiness. And so this is kind of this is another slippery slope, because we don't want to like throw it all out in the garbage. What we need to do in our own self-training is keep the compassion and the empathy, but get rid of the brainwashing. You know, we want to be able, all of us, men and women and men, and every other gender, we want to be able to be compassionate, empathetic beings who care, but we also want to be able to be clear in what belongs to us and what doesn't belong to us, in the things that we ourselves need in order to be nurtured to health and wellness. We need to be able to have clear, healthy boundaries. And we need to be able to set our terms in our relationships without feeling like we are somehow insulting or violating, you know, or turning our back because we said, no, I really don't want to go to the movies tonight. I really would like to have a quiet night in, that we're somehow just caused the world to end. Right? We need to move away from the brainwashing and into the clarity. And silence can absolutely help us do that. Regular bouts of silence can absolutely support us. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you to everybody who has shared today. You have very profound thoughts, very profound reflections, absolutely. And we have time for one more. Well, actually we don't, but we will. Anybody else? Anybody else have any questions or reflections they'd like to share? Okay. So as a takeaway from here, and half of you were in the retreat this weekend and half of you weren't, and so I tried to make this talk today one that blended well for everybody, whether you were here over the weekend or not. So the takeaway is, you know, silence is good. Stillness is good. Commit yourself to it, even 10 minutes a day. Turn off the phone, turn off the television, turn off your expectations. Don't make excuses like the dog has to go out, right? There's already one dog pooping on the floor. Yeah, take care of that one first. And don't be afraid to inquire about the foundation that you've set for yourself in your relationship to yourself and your relationship to all others. What expectations have you yourself put in place? What have you taught other people about how to treat you, about how to expect from you? It's never too late to change. It's never too late to change. You know when it's too late to change? When you've taken your last breath. So don't wait. Make the changes. healthfully, mindfully, thoughtfully now, over a reasonable period of time. And this way, when the time does come for that last breath, it's taken peacefully and with joy, with no regret. That'll be another wisdom circle. All right, let's sit tall. We'll close the eyes. And draw the hands together in front of the heart. May we all come into a deeper relationship with inner silence and stillness. May we find the courage, the curiosity, the creativity to embrace our own potential and the potential of all others in a way that is healthy, balanced, and nourishing. And we'll lift our voices in one Om. Take a breath in. Hari Om. Jai Mata Di. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today to have this conversation. Thank you so much for continuing to come support the ashram, the teachings of this beautiful tradition, which is our tradition, but we didn't create it. It's a tradition that has ancient roots, the earliest of which are India, right? And still to this day, so many people don't realize that. So many people don't realize that. So just please know that these teachings are not something that I made up. I just like talking about them. That they've been tested over time by sages and saints and great teachers and lesser teachers and people in general. They're time proven, time tried and tested. There's something there for you. There absolutely is. So do discover it for yourself. If everybody's going down to the kitchen to get their brunch now, single file, enjoy.
I have something to say.
Oh, absolutely. Michelle has something to say.
The Wisdom Circle has been recorded, so if you want to listen again on YouTube, there's a YouTube